Millions of Americans sat glued to their televisions on the morning of January 28, 1986. Among them were countless school children, gathered in classrooms to watch their teacher, Krista McAuliffe, embark on what was supposed to be a groundbreaking journey into space. What they saw instead was horror. 73 seconds after liftoff, the Challenger broke apart in the sky. Families of the crew, officials in mission control, and the nation itself were left paralyzed. The story that followed was not just about a technical failure, but about warnings ignored, lives lost, and truths buried for years. The dream and the crew, the mission designated STS-51L, was meant to be a landmark in the history of the Space Shuttle program. It was Challenger's 10th flight and the 25th mission of the shuttle fleet. Its goals were ambitious: to deploy a commercial communications satellite, to send a small spacecraft named Spartan to study Halley's Comet during its once-in-a-lifetime close pass, and most famously, to carry Krista McAuliffe, the first teacher chosen to fly in space. She had been selected in 1984 through a national program that captured the imagination of an entire generation. Her role was not symbolic alone. She planned to conduct lessons from orbit, and then spend 9 months visiting schools across the country to inspire young people to pursue science and technology. The rest of the crew was equally accomplished. Commander Francis Dick Scobie led the team, with Michael Smith serving as pilot. The 3 mission specialists were Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, and Ronald McNair, each highly trained engineers and scientists. The final seat was held by Gregory Jarvis, an engineer from Hughes Aircraft. Together, they formed one of the most diverse crews in shuttle history, carrying with them not only professional expertise, but also the hopes of millions of ordinary Americans who saw themselves reflected in their backgrounds. The lead-up to the launch was far from smooth. Originally scheduled for January 22, 1986, the mission had already been delayed several times. Technical issues, as well as the need to return Columbia from its previous flight, pushed the schedule further. As the nation watched, anticipation grew. Few outside NASA knew that behind the scenes, engineers were deeply worried. The shuttle's design, particularly the solid rocket boosters, carried risks that had already revealed themselves in earlier flights. What the public saw as a shining symbol of progress, some insiders quietly feared could one day become a catastrophe. The shuttle and its flawed design. When the Apollo program ended in 1972, NASA faced a crisis. It had achieved the impossible, landing humans on the moon. But instead of endless funding, Congress slashed budgets. The agency needed a new project that would keep it relevant in the Cold War era, something that would convince lawmakers, the military, and the public that space exploration still mattered. The answer was the Space Shuttle, a reusable space truck that could fly dozens of missions each year, carrying satellites, scientific experiments, and even secret military payloads. The concept looked brilliant on paper, but money shaped the design more than safety. A key decision involved the shuttle's 2 massive solid rocket boosters, or SRBS. The safest option would have been liquid-fueled boosters, but those were more expensive and would take years longer to develop. To save money and satisfy political partners, NASA contracted Morton Thiokol to build solid-fueled boosters instead. These boosters were not only more dangerous, once ignited, they couldn't be shut down, but they were manufactured in segments. Each piece had to be bolted together, sealed by rubber gaskets called O-rings. From the earliest test flights, the O-rings showed troubling behavior. As early as 1981, engineers noticed black soot and burn marks that suggested gases were escaping. Several shuttle missions revealed erosion of the rings, sometimes leaving the backup seal as the only thing preventing catastrophe. Engineers at Thiokol grew increasingly alarmed. Among them was Roger Boisjoli, who in 1984 wrote a memo warning that if the O-rings were not fixed, the shuttle risked the loss of human life. His memo was ignored. Instead, NASA managers began practicing what sociologists later called the normalization of deviance. Problems that did not cause immediate disaster were treated as acceptable. Each successful mission reinforced the illusion that the system was safe. The night before the launch. The evening of January 27, 1986, was brutally cold for Florida standards. Forecasts predicted that overnight lows would drop to 18 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 8 degrees Celsius, colder than any shuttle launch in history. At the Kennedy Space Center, icicles hung from the launch tower, and the steel structures gleamed with frozen condensation. This was no ordinary launch day, and the engineers knew it. That night, a three-way teleconference was arranged between NASA managers at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama, staff at Kennedy in Florida, and Morton Thiokol engineers in Utah. The topic was the O-rings. Engineers like Alan McDonald and Roger Boyes-Joly warned that the rubber seals had never been tested at such low temperatures. Data showed they lost flexibility in the cold, meaning they might not expand quickly enough to seal the joints when the boosters ignited. They argued that the shuttle should not launch if the temperature was below 53 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 degrees Celsius, the coldest previous shuttle flight. Initially, Thiokol management sided with their engineers and recommended delaying the launch, but NASA's SRB project manager, Lawrence Malloy, pushed back hard. He asked whether Thiokol expected him to wait until April for warmer weather. The pressure was unmistakable. During a recess in the call, Thiokol executives told their engineers to put on their management hats. When the call resumed, the company reversed its position. They now claimed the evidence was inconclusive and that the shuttle should proceed. Alan McDonald, who was at Kennedy that night, refused to sign off on the launch. He told NASA he could not, in good conscience, approve. But Thiokol executive Joe Kilminster signed the recommendation in Utah and faxed it through. Malloy reported to NASA's mission management team, leaving out the O-ring concerns entirely. By then, the decision was made. Challenger would fly the next morning. Launch and disaster. On the morning of January 28, 1986, the countdown resumed at Kennedy Space Center. Challenger lifted off at 11:38 a.m. Eastern Standard Time from Launch Complex 39B, rising into a cloudless Florida sky. Families of the astronauts cheered from the viewing stands. Across America, classrooms tuned in, with children watching Krista McAuliffe fulfill her dream of becoming the first teacher in space. But within seconds, disaster had already begun. At less than 1 second after ignition, cameras recorded 9 puffs of dark gray smoke from the right solid rocket booster's aft field joint. The cold weather had stiffened the O-rings, and they failed to seal. For a brief time, molten aluminum oxide from the burning propellant filled the gap, creating a fragile, temporary plug. Challenger continued upward as if nothing was wrong. By plus 37 seconds, the shuttle hit strong wind shear, but the guidance system corrected. At T plus 59 seconds, a plume of flame burst from the right booster. The makeshift seal had broken, and the flame began cutting directly into the external fuel tank. Pressure readings confirmed that hydrogen was leaking. At T plus 68 seconds, Capcom Richard Covey radioed, "Challenger, go at throttle up." Commander Dick Scobie calmly replied, "Roger, go at throttle up." It would be the last words heard from the shuttle. At T plus 72 seconds, the booster's aft strut failed. The right booster twisted violently, tearing into the massive external tank. Hydrogen and oxygen mixed in an uncontrolled torrent. At T plus 73 seconds, the shuttle stack disintegrated in what engineers later described as a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, a BLEVE. To the public, it looked like a single fiery blast. In reality, it was the structure of the shuttle collapsing under immense forces at Mach 1.92, 46,000 feet above the Atlantic. Pieces of Challenger tore away. Wings, engines, and most hauntingly, the crew cabin. The two boosters flew on like unguided spears, forcing ground safety officers to detonate them 40 seconds later. In mission control, confusion reigned. Flight controllers searched desperately for signals. At T+89 seconds, NASA's public affairs officer Steve Nesbitt broke the silence. Obviously a major malfunction. Only minutes later did the truth sink in. The shuttle had been destroyed. The crew's final moments and recovery. When Challenger broke apart at 73 seconds, the orbiter disintegrated, but the crew cabin did not. Built from reinforced aluminum, it separated intact, hurled upward before beginning its long, deadly fall. For decades, many believed the astronauts died instantly in the explosion. The truth, uncovered later, was far more tragic. The cabin reached an apogee of about 65,000 feet, then entered free fall. The forces during breakup peaked between 12 and 20 grams for only a second or two, dropping quickly to survivable levels. Medical investigators later concluded these forces alone would not have killed the crew. Inside, at least some of them were alive. Personal egress air packs, or PEAPS, had been manually activated for 3 astronauts, including pilot Michael Smith. Because his switch was located behind his seat, one of his crewmates, likely Judith Resnick or Ellison Onizuka, must have reached over to turn it on for him. These were not automated systems. They required conscious action. Even more chilling, investigators found cockpit switches moved from their launch positions. They had protective lever locks, meaning someone, again, probably Smith, pulled them out and tried to restore electrical power during the fall. These details painted a haunting picture. The crew knew something was wrong and tried, however hopelessly, to respond. For the next 2 minutes and 45 seconds, the cabin plummeted toward the Atlantic. The cabin was not equipped with parachutes or escape systems, and depressurization may have caused unconsciousness. Still, there remains a possibility that some of the crew were aware until the very end. At 207 miles per hour, the cabin slammed into the ocean with a force estimated at 200 G, utterly unsurvivable. Recovery operations began immediately. On January 31st, the Navy deployed submarines to search the seafloor. In March, divers located the shattered crew compartment at a depth of 100 feet. The wreckage revealed that the cabin had stayed largely intact until impact. The remains of the 7 astronauts were badly damaged by both the crash and weeks underwater. Identification was carried out by the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, but no exact cause of death could ever be determined. Funerals followed in April 1986. Commander Scobie and pilot Michael Smith were buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Ellison Onizuka was laid to rest in Hawaii, Ronald McNair in South Carolina, Krista McAuliffe in New Hampshire. Judith Resnick was cremated, her ashes scattered over water. Gregory Jarvis's ashes were scattered in the Pacific. Unidentified remains were interred at the Challenger Memorial in Arlington on May 20th, 1986. The investigation and public response. In the weeks after the disaster, the world demanded answers. President Ronald Reagan, who had been scheduled to deliver his State of the Union address on the very night of the accident, instead spoke to the nation from the Oval Office. His words mourned the fallen and tried to comfort a grieving public, but behind the scenes, the White House faced rumors that political pressure had influenced the launch decision. A later report cleared the administration of any direct interference, yet the suspicion lingered. Had Challenger flown on schedule so the president could mention it in his speech? Reagan quickly established the Rogers Commission, chaired by former Secretary of State William Rogers. Its members included legendary names like Neil Armstrong, Sally Ride, Chuck Yeager, and Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman. Their investigation tore away NASA's carefully managed image. Within weeks, Feynman himself performed a devastating demonstration, dipping a piece of O-ring rubber into a glass of ice water during a televised hearing. The material stiffened instantly, proving to the public how dangerously the cold weather had undermined the shuttle's seals. The Commission's June 1986 report painted a damning picture. NASA's culture had become complacent. Engineers' warnings were ignored or filtered out before reaching decision-makers. Schedules and optics mattered more than safety. Morton Thiokol's reversal of its engineers' recommendation the night before launch became a symbol of how management pressure overrode engineering truth. The phrase normalization of deviance entered the lexicon, describing how repeated minor failures had been reclassified as acceptable risk. Media coverage had been relentless. CNN's live broadcast meant millions saw the tragedy unfold in real time. NASA's decision to place a civilian teacher aboard had guaranteed classrooms across the country were watching. The impact on children was profound, leaving lifelong memories of shock and grief. In the Soviet Union, news broadcasts showed the footage with an unusually sympathetic tone, free of propaganda. For once, even Cold War rivals mourned together. By February 4th, when Reagan finally delivered his postponed State of the Union, his words included a tribute to the crew, calling their sacrifice a reminder of both the risks and the necessity of exploration. Yet the Commission's findings went further than commemoration. They forced NASA to halt flights for 32 months and overhaul the shuttle program. Safety offices were created, solid rocket boosters redesigned, and astronauts required to wear pressurized suits during ascent and re-entry. The fleet would eventually return to space, but the image of invincibility was gone forever. The Challenger accident did more than expose technical flaws. It became a case study in ethics, communication, and human decision-making. For engineers like Roger Boyce-Joly and Alan MacDonald, who had fought to delay the launch, the aftermath turned them into outspoken advocates for integrity in the workplace. Business schools, engineering programs, and ethics courses still analyze Challenger as a warning of what happens when groupthink and pressure silence dissenting voices. The Challenger disaster was not simply an accident. It was the result of ignored warnings, misplaced priorities, and the tragic consequences of believing success guaranteed safety. Krista McAuliffe, Dick Scobie, Michael Smith, Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, Ronald McNair, and Gregory Jarvis paid the ultimate price for those failures. Their story reminds us that progress comes with risk, but also with responsibility. Now I want to hear from you. Did you already know about the ignored warnings before the launch, or was this the first time you heard about them? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this story important, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and click the bell so you never miss more stories like this one.